Good morning, Revolution. Hello, comrades. Hi to everyone who's watching online. My name's Ben, and I'm going to be your host for this week. Standing in for, but couldn't possibly replace, the great Joe Sims. And want to welcome you to this week's episode. Feel free to like and subscribe and follow this show on YouTube, Twitter, Twitch every Friday, 10:30 a.m. Eastern. So, welcome to the show. I'm joined here by three brilliant and dedicated comrades. We're so excited to have them here to unpack this very heavy but important subject. So we have Ami and Waleed and Emily. And so just I'm so glad you guys could join us and welcome. And do you all want to say a little bit about yourselves, what areas of struggle you're involved in, where you're from, maybe something you did this past weekend? How about Waleed? Let's start with you.
Hi, my name's Waleed, and I'm from Connecticut. And yeah, we're just fighting the good fight in Connecticut, trying to build the party, and we're really active in. Recently, there was the Pratt and Whitney strike that we really supportive in, and they ended up winning a big victory in that strike. So it was a long strike, three weeks, but it ended up pretty good. So happy with that.
That's so great, and I read about that in People's World. That seemed like a really important. That's so great that you all are involved in that. Emily, how about yourself? Where are you based, and what have you been working on?
Yeah, so I'm based in Washington, D.C., where I was born and raised. So I do a lot of work at the intersection of DC autonomy, racial justice, Palestinian liberation. Been doing that work for a while. And yeah, I think this last weekend I was able to go to a vigil for George Floyd at a local Target, which was organized by a number of Black pastors and other religious folks who are participating in the boycott of Target for the last several months, and they held a special vigil on Sunday for George Floyd, which was really powerful to hear and to be with a number of religious folks kind of praying around social justice and how we move ourselves forward.
That's so great. That's such important work, and I'm assuming your cat is also politically involved.
Yes, she is
Okay,
very
good.
politically involved. She makes it known every time I'm on camera.
Excellent, excellent, very good. We'll be hearing more from Emily and especially the cat soon enough. Ami, you're a New Yorker like myself. What you got going on?
So I do a lot of different things within the Communist Party, but relevant to this, I'm part of the Jewish Committee, and I've been doing a lot of research and writing for the Jewish Committee over the last several months.
That's great. Well, we're so glad to have all three of you on. The subject for today's program, uh, we're calling it Leninism versus anti-Semitism, Zionism, and the Christian right. That's a mouthful. That's a series of really intense subjects. But we think that it's so important to understand the connection of those subjects in terms of our work organizing for the solidarity and the freedom of Palestine. So um, I think that we want to really frame this is how do we learn from history, understand the theory and practice of anti-imperialist struggles in the past, of the history of Jewish anti-Zionist movements, and how this kind of history can inform the necessary struggle for the present, with the horrors that continue to daily unfold in Gaza and the U.S. continued backing of far right Israeli Zionist fascist policies. We need more than ever to ground ourselves in the history and the theory of our intersectional movements. So, without further ado, Ami, why don't you get us started? What do you when I say Zionism, what does that mean to you?
So, Zionism is, yeah, it's been many things over the years, but in its current iteration, it's Jewish ethno-nationalism, It's marketed as this program for keeping Jews safe via, a 19th century style nationalism. Uh, yeah, and it's kind of taken over a lot of Jewish spaces, whereas once it was this very fringe thing, and but beyond that, it's also moved into U.S. politics and through the evangelical Christian right. It's become the hot topic of the time.
Yeah, I agree. Emily, do you have anything to add to that definition, or some just to pick up on that?
I mean, I think that Zionism throughout history has tried to kind of interpret history, showing that Jewish people are alone, and to remedy that, we have to, create this state and more isolation, in order to keep us safe, which I think if you look through history, isolation has never kept people safe. And I think just, the ways that we're seeing it play out now in the US with the rise of, I mean, not the rise, but the continuance of white Christian nationalism and Zionism kind of making its way into our government as well.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. I mean, I think many people would be surprised to know, and I know Ami that you're particularly up on this subject. Well, actually, I think all of us, all of our organizing routes have taken us to this. But the kind of shocking, almost prehistory of a kind of Christian nationalism as part of the British Empire. I mean, I think many people would be surprised to know that the one Jewish member of the cabinet, when Balfour issued his declaration, voted against the creation of a Jewish homeland. So we have this really interesting history going back to Churchill, going back even farther than that, of nationalist anti-Semites, who aren't Jewish, promoting Zionism as a way to rid Europe um, of its Jewish population, and in the case of the British Empire, serve as a buffer population to help subjugate um, the Ottoman Empire and the Arab population. And this has resonance to the present day. Ami, I know that you've been doing some research on into the Christian Zionist movement. What have you found there?
Yeah, it's actually older than the Jewish Zionist movement, right? The Jewish Zionist movement is a political Zionist movement is said to have started at the end of the 19th century with Theodor Herzl and his book calling for a Jewish state, a Judenstaat. But Christian Zionism actually began in the 1820s, 1830s, as part of an evangelical movement in England called dispensationalism, which promotes a literal understanding of the Bible, and a key belief for them was that all Jews have to return to the Holy Land, and where they will eventually all be killed, except for a few select ones which will accept Jesus, and then you have a second coming of Jesus. And yeah, so this is like a key component of this evangelical belief. And the British elite at the time bought into it as a way to rid themselves of Jews. There was a lot of Jews trying to leave the oppression of the Russian Empire. Many were going to England. So, people like Balfour and others supported the Zionist idea because it fit with the Christian narrative, and it helped get rid of this Jewish population that they didn't want. But originally, Jews rejected it. Very few Jews accepted Zionism at this point. And it was only almost more than a half century later that Zionism became mainstream among Jews.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. And I think also from from a communist perspective, if you look at our own history, and there's a great website that documents a lot of this, Revolution Newsstand, which has just incredible articles from the Daily Worker, from the various Jewish communist movements of the day, talking about the utter rejection of Zionism, the need to work with Arab working class in Palestine, to reject British imperialism and Jewish ethno-nationalism. And there's such a rich history there that's been so buried. What can we do about that, bringing to light that history, and how should that inform our present? I mean, Emily, I know that you do a lot of organizing in this area, especially with Eyes on Silwan, and that campaign, I think, really draws, stands at the crossroads of a lot of things we're talking about. Help us out here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's very easy to see concrete examples of how Christian Zionism and Zionism from Jewish folks now are coming together and trying to um, work together to continue this sort of white nationalist hegemony over the area between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. And I think that these the ideals that have been forward really do have real world dangerous consequences. And so yeah, one of the organizations that I work with is called Eyewitness Silwan, and we're helping to support a community in Jerusalem, the Silwan neighborhood, where about 80% of the Palestinian residents there are about to be or have already been expelled to build a Bible theme park. So it's being funded by Israeli settler organizations and Zion and Christian Zionists, and we see some of the examples of that is actually, or the examples of how that's kind of seeping into all of our policy through the nomination and confirmation of Mike Huckabee as ambassador to Israel. So, just as one example, I mean, Mike Huckabee is an infamous Christian Zionist, Christian nationalist. And he actually was at the opening of a Jewish tourist center in the middle of this Palestinian neighborhood in Jerusalem. And many of his funders also fund this settlement project that's being built there. And so it's really easy to see how this sort of ideology is really rapidly growing. And I think it's important to note that there are way more Christian Zionists in the US, in the world, than there are Jewish. And Christians United for Israel, the largest pro-Israel organization in the US, claims to have 10 million members, which is more members than all of the Jewish people put together in the US. So quite powerful, quite large, and I think it's something that we all need to be really concerned about.
I think, and also, like, Waleed, want to bring you in here. I mean, part of the synthesis that seems to have happened is, Lenin identified all forms of bourgeois nationalism as an enemy to the working class movement. So of course, and Lenin goes on to say, very explicitly about how all forms of bourgeois chauvinism are an enemy to the internationalist movement. But what seems to have happened is that the kind of Jewish bourgeois elites who were against socialism, who articulated this chauvinistic Zionist vision, got backing from the British Empire. I mean, Winston Churchill's like quite explicit. He wrote this incredible article called Zionism versus Bolshevism in 1920, back when Winston Churchill was telling everyone that Mussolini was a great guy. And he talks about how the British Empire needs to back these proud nationalist Jews against the Bolshevik ones. And he says quite explicitly, in part, so that we can help control the Middle East and get their oil. I mean, he writes this in a public editorial. It's quite explicit. I mean, as someone who has, who's lived in Saudi Arabia, our other great ally, and Britain's other great ally in the war to control the Middle East. I mean, what do you think of all this imperial nonsense?
Yeah, I think you see that you still see that playing out in the Middle East. I was reading an article recently about how arming Saudi Arabia has been even though there was opposition among our ruling class on whether to support Saudi Arabia militarily, it's actually worked out really well because they've been instrumental in helping Israel recently. When the Houthis blocked the Red Sea, it was Saudi Arabia who was facilitating aid to Israel. And and yeah, we see this with the weaponization of Islam in general. I was born in Pakistan, so we another a product of British colony, and it's essentially a military dictatorship that thrives on military and financial aid from the West, and it props up this military power, but also they've been active. Saudi Arabia and Pakistani ISI, which is their version of the CIA, they've been active in the region in promoting really radical Islamic ideology and funding these terrorist groups. So it's really, and we're seeing this in Syria as well. I think correct me if I'm wrong, but we removed the sanctions on Syria now that Al Qaeda is in power, and Assad is gone. So we're consistently using Islam and really nationalistic, radical form of Islam to serve our political ends.
What I think that speaks to, and that goes all the way back to the British Empire. Will whether the British or the U.S. Empire will back just about anyone as long as they aren't the socialist masses, the oppressed masses of Arab people. So I mean, propping up dictatorships, propping up religious fundamentalists, and then backing Jewish supremacist movements and implanting it in the heart of a oil-rich region is all just a day's work for the British Empire and now the American Empire. I mean, what do we and then when the Jewish supremacist movement isn't doing it, go to the second position of the Christian evangelical rapturists, who, by the way, Emily mentioned Kufi. They have their own oil company actually, and are buying up oil rights right now in the Megiddo Valley. But be that as it may, I mean, Waleed, you're on the ground, in Connecticut. How do we use this information to help build our internationalist, intersectionalist, working class movement against this imperialist and chauvinist crap? How do we do it?
Yeah, I think when Lenin talked about anti-Semitism, he pointed out that it's used by the ruling class to divide workers, right? And I think we're seeing this. I think we have to point out that the real anti-Semitism is coming from the right wing. It's coming from the Christian evangelicals. And I think other forms of bigotry like Islamophobia, like xenophobia, are used by the working class or by the bourgeoisie to divide us. And I think what we're doing in Connecticut right now is, I think what's really effective is working in broad coalitions and bringing the cause for Palestine and peace into those coalitions. So we had a coalition meeting last night, and our comrade Henry Lohendorf, who is the chair of the Greater New Haven Peace Council, he spoke really eloquently about Palestine, about what's going on in Gaza, and the need to hold Yale accountable, because Yale New Haven Hospital, huge hospital right now, every week the healthcare workers for Gaza and Doctors Against Genocide, those two organizations, they hold a vigil every week, and they're demanding that Yale and other powerful institutions speak out against what's going on, because they are targeting healthcare workers, they are targeting women and children. So I think we have to continue building the labor movement, continue building organs of power in our society, but only through that can we bring. I think we have to make it part of the Communist Plus, right? When we engage with various movements, we have to bring that consciousness about Palestine and Zionism to that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so central, and our understanding of imperialism. I mean, Emily, like the work you do is so inspiring to me, because I mean, I think it brings in that international component. It links, it shows that this is part, like a lot of the work you focus on, seems to me, really highlights the fact that, like, yes, we should march, yes, we should rally, but there are these nodes of power, and so many of them are rooted in the United States and rooted in a imperial hegemony and even a Christian nationalist hegemony. So I mean, maybe talk a little more about well, you mentioned Eyewitness Still One, but also your work protesting Kufi and how those things are related to U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, in terms of sort of, I agree completely with what Waleed just said around kind of connecting different struggles and being able to bring those in. And I think for me, as an anti-Zionist Jewish person, I always think about Angela Davis's quote, "It's not enough to be non-racist, we have to be anti-racist." And I think that that is something that we need to start connecting to what is happening in Palestine right now. You can't be non-Zionist. You can't just not really accept that, but you have to actually fight against it. And you have to fight against Zionism in all forms, which includes Christian Zionism or white Christian nationalism. And I think, Kufi, as the largest Zionist organization in the US, is a really important target for people to be looking at. And I think that we see Christian nationalism, as I said, I think before, seeping into, high ranks in our government. And I think this also comes out of kind of the Project Esther that's connected to Project 2025, but that people don't know quite as much about. But in a lot of ways, Project Esther, which tries to outline a strategy for dismantling the Palestine solidarity movement in the US, is really deploying these false claims of anti-Semitism and terrorism against the movement through surveillance and propaganda. But in actuality, Project Esther itself deploys anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, mixed with these false claims of defending Jews, kind of as a smokescreen to attack the Palestine liberation movement. And so really being clear about who has the power in the US, who is pushing the current administration's policies. And when you look into that, a lot of that are these Christian nationalist movements that actually are anti-Semitic themselves. So I think really trying to focus on that, and just focusing on that. And, I think that protests and rallies and every kind of direct action that people are doing right now is really important to keep Palestine on the radar. And at the same time, we need to be focusing in on these parts of these bits of power to try and stop what's happening.
I think that's so important. Also, I think Waleed brought up, the need to, we need an anti-war movement. It's our taxpayer dollars, it's our bombs made here in the U.S., and it's, this imperialist hegemonic project that, links what's going on in Israel to what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq. When a lot of us were, in high school, the never-ending project of the U.S. to picking up where Britain left off to control the Middle East for oil. Ami, I know you know something about this. There's also the question of far right, and I think we can just say outright fascist chauvinism in the Jewish community, and the immense power that those forces have within the Jewish community itself, such that building up an anti-Zionist Jewish movement, people face extreme reprisals, including violence. That there's that, and actually, again, this goes all the way back. You can read Daily Worker articles from the 1920s about Jewish communists and Jewish Zionists, having street fights in the Bronx. This is a nasty, ugly history. Can you say something about the sort of your personal experience and with struggling against this within your own community, against these kind of fascist ideologies and power structures?
Yeah, I grew up in a community that was, many of the members, or most of the members, ascribed to what is known as Kahanism, right? It's the Zionist fascist philosophy that was started by Meir Kahane in Brooklyn in the 1960s. And it combines the most fascistic elements of revisionist Zionism that was from the early 1920s and 30s, that were the early Zionists that wanted to work with the Nazis. They reached out to the Nazis and like, oh, we'll support you, we'll be your ally. Just let us, create this Jewish state here. And he combined it with religious messianic fundamentalism. And in 1968, he started an organization in the U.S. called the Jewish Defense League, which was designated as a terrorist group by the U.S. government. And then in 1971 moved to Israel and started a political party, which eventually was banned. It was so extreme that even the U.S. called them terrorists, and Israel banned them. And then recently, it's become mainstream for various reasons. We have people in the Israeli cabinet, the heads of the security ministry. Ben Gvir is a Kahanist. He doesn't even hide it. It used to be Kahanists would try to hide their connection. He celebrates it. And the JDL in the U.S. has been removed from the FBI list of terrorist groups. So they've created this kind of mafia type fear where they, as Ben said, use violence to enforce these viewpoints within the Jewish community. There was just a case in Brooklyn 2 weeks ago when Ben Gvir, the specific security minister, went to an event in Brooklyn, and anti-Zionist Jewish protesters were protesting outside, and people came out and they abused and beat up the protesters and threw bottles of urine at them, and people were hospitalized. It's crazy. And then we saw just now in this past week in Jerusalem, they had what they called the Flag March, marking the 1967 conquest of East Jerusalem by the Israeli military. And these Kahanist type went around the Muslim quarter of the old city of Jerusalem, harassing shop owners and damaging property. And there was this group called Standing Together. It's a grassroots Jewish Palestinian group, and their activists try and physically put themselves in between the Palestinians that are being harassed and the Kahanists that are harassing them. And they also, they face abuse, and they were beaten. And it's a very violent movement. Violence is inherent to fascism, right? One of the things that all fascists have in common is this glorification of violence, and it's in Kahana's writings in the same way that it was in Mussolini's writings or Hitler's writings.
So it shouldn't surprise anyone. I mean, I think for a lot of people, it's hard to wrap their heads around. But I mean, the fact that there are anti-Semitic Zionists and Jewish fascists, should tell you something about the nature, the class nature and the imperialist nature of these ideologies and these projects. I mean, but of course, central to the American project, this kind of Judeo-Christian imperialist ethos. But in our lifetime, at least in my lifetime, anti-Arab racism, Islamophobia have been so central to mobilizing American public sentiment. Even the term terrorist, the war on terror, the Patriot Act, all these horrible, horrible breaches of our civil liberties, which the Bush administration put in and which Trump is more than happy to use. I mean, Walid, you came here as an immigrant. That must have been right around when this was all happening. That must have been a terrifying experience.
Well, I didn't know much about it, but I think my parents definitely told me to keep my head down, don't go to any demonstrations, don't go to any, don't get involved in any activism. And they still tell me not to get involved with the Communist Party and all of that, because the fear is still there that
You're on the YouTube show.
Yeah, I know. So I think the fear among the immigrant community, I mean, especially now that people are being disappeared, and especially among immigrant Muslims who are really fearing that they could be, taken. I mean, Guantanamo was always the fear. I guess it's El Salvador now, but it is always there in the back of your head that you're really risking something big.
Yeah, the stakes couldn't be higher. I mean, for the people of Gaza, for the people of Palestine. I mean, the violence, the deranged levels of violence that Ami talked about. Within one group, within the Jewish ethno-chauvinism, becomes the sort of organizing principle of the American empire. And I mean, for American hegemony, we seem to be willing to do just about everything, including trampling on the Constitution. It's a very dangerous moment. I know, Emily, that you also had experiences sort of coming out of a more right wing Jewish community background. I mean, can you talk about maybe how you went on that journey and some of the risks and how you bring that to your organizing now?
Sure. So I will say I came from a very progressive Jewish background, but progressive Zionist Jewish background is what I would say. So, I think I had a mixture of growing up in Washington, D.C., where my parents were very deeply connected to the community here and worked alongside some of the major civil rights folks at the time in D.C. But always growing up with this sense of Israel is this utopian place where Jewish people can be safe. And I think over the years, as I started to travel there, first with Zionist organizations and then later with anti-Zionist organizations, I slowly saw the cracks of that ideal of a utopian for Jewish people as I started to learn about the racism within Israeli society, the ways that even Palestinian citizens of Israel don't have the same rights as Jewish citizens of Israel. And as I started to learn these things, I then fell back on my sort of progressive values that I grew up with around racism in the US and said, well, if that isn't right here, why is it right there? Why is it right anywhere else? And so through my time there, I was able to, slowly understand more about both internal Israeli political system and the ways in which even white Ashkenazi European Jews are the minority in Israel, but yet they're the ones in power in the government. So learning these sort of bits and pieces just started to open up this crack that I, being sort of the curious person I am, dove into the crack. I think, obviously I could have seen these cracks and said, oh no, I'm going to take a step back. I don't want to learn about this. But instead, I really dove in and said, well, I'm going to do what my parents taught me, which is to listen to the people around me and learn, their experiences. And as I did that more and more from Palestinians, I just realized that there's no way that I could support the political ideology behind, what is creating all of the injustices for them. And I think now I just think about, again, I do think that going and seeing for yourself is a really powerful thing. My cat also agrees with that. She's never been, but she's trying to sneak her way in. I think that going there is really important because once you see it, there's no way to unsee what is happening there. You can spend 5 minutes at a checkpoint. You could spend 5 minutes walking around Jerusalem, and um, you'll see the injustice and you'll see sort of the discrimination that is happening on a surface level. And then as you dig deeper, you can find out a lot more. And I think that I also think the Israeli government knows that people coming there and seeing is really powerful. And I'll say, because I know this from personal experience, because I was denied entry and banned from Israel for running trips to Palestine, to Israel, to have people meet with Palestinians and Israelis who are pushing for peace with justice. And, I was targeted and then deported. And, in my official record, it says I run trips to surveil the Israeli Defense Force, which, the only surveillance we do would be walking around seeing military everywhere or going through a checkpoint. But, just to bring people there to walk and see the reality is a threat. If that's a threat, then you're obviously doing something, that's wrong. If just going and talking to people there threatens your entire government and creates security concerns.
That's incredible. I actually didn't know. So you and Peter Beinart both can't go. I mean, it is amazing. I think that speaks to. I mean, this is a slightly maybe subtle point for most people, but yeah, there was at one point people claimed a sort of range of opinions or spectrums within people who self-identified Zionist. Of course, the communist tradition would has always said that kind of things of false consciousness or false ideology. But nevertheless, I think to Ami's point, it's like the people who were even so extreme that they were classified as fascists by the U.S. state, are now the people in charge of the government. So this kind of inevitable rightward lurch, I think, has meant that mainstream folks, I mean, I'm thinking of people like Peter Beinart, people not from the left, have been forced to see that, as you put it so well, this state, is the opposite of a liberal utopia, is the opposite of a tolerant society. It's a violent, militaristic state that's using every form of power to enact horrific, unbelievable violence on a colonized people. But that brings us to I think the classic Lenin question: what is to be done? I mean, with all this, and also especially since we all live in the U.S., and I think it's especially important for our comrades abroad and everyone to realize that, again, we in the United States understand we have a special responsibility because it's the U.S. empire, its funding, its weapons that enable this and so many acts of violence around the world. I'm old enough to remember and have participated as a high schooler in the anti-Iraq war movement. Where's that movement today? Where's that power? Where's that organization? And how do we recapture that? Because as important as it is that people now recognize, people are seeing the horrors of Palestine. People are seeing what's happening, the Israeli genocidal campaign in Palestine. People are seeing the atrocities. But I don't know that, and there's more solidarity demonstrations than ever for Palestine than there ever has been. But how do we turn that into political power? Waleed, I turn it over to you just because, again, you've been. But I throw this open to the whole panel. Let's start with Waleed, and then how do we build a movement to actually stop this? I suppose would be one way.
Yeah, to me, I think what's of utmost importance right now, like growing up in Saudi Arabia, we had no political rights, right? It's a dictatorship. And as immigrants, we had absolutely no rights. You spoke up, you went out of line, you were deported or thrown into a migrant camp. So there's millions of migrant laborers there that have absolutely no rights. They're near slaves. And so even though the majority of the population is against support for Israel, there's no way to actually do anything about it. And I think in the US, we have to not take our political freedoms for granted, especially when they're under attack from the fascist right now. So I think right now, the midterms are coming up very soon. I think we have to make sure that we are getting people registered to vote, getting involved in the elections to make sure that the Republicans don't go in to 2023 or 2027, sorry, with a trifecta in the government again. And we have to organize around everyday issues, I think, and make sure that we who support peace and support the Palestine cause are in there, involved in these movements for better conditions and better lives for everyone. I think that's the meaning of class struggle. That's the meaning of solidarity, and we bring those issues together. I think, to me, like, labor is going to be a big thing because there's talk of coordinating contracts so that there can be a big strike in 2028. I think that could be. I think our goal should be to get the Palestine cause, the peace cause, into the demands of that strike if it happens, or into the demands that labor is making. So that's what
Absolutely.
I think.
Absolutely. And I mean, also, there are people talking about tax resisting on a mass scale, like what happened in the Vietnam War. I mean, what's the kind of civil disobedience and force and organization to really bring this thing to a halt? Let's go to Ami and then Emily, and then I think we'll wrap up with, I think there's a mailbag question, but we'll see, and a greeting from from a fraternal party. But Ami, why don't we go to you and then Emily?
Yeah, I think Jews like us that are aware of what's going on, we need to be loud. We need to tell the ruling class that our identity will not be weaponized by them to push their agenda, to give them cover for supporting all the atrocities and their imperialistic goals. When Trump is using the supposed cause to protect Jews as an excuse to silence people, to disappear people, to ignore the Constitution. But even before that, I mean, you had in the election campaigns, Trump and Biden stood up and said to Jewish crowds, like, "Oh, Israel, your country," and as if Jews aren't real Americans, and that the other people will tell us what it means to be a Jew, and other people will tell us what we have to believe. We can't allow that to happen, and we have to be active in our communities, and we have to build bridges between our communities and the other communities around us. Solidarity, working class solidarity, and internationalism is it has to be our response to those that want to divide us and again abuse our backgrounds and our identities for their own political ends.
Thank you. Well said, Ami. Emily, what you got for us?
I guess I'll add, for me, I actually look towards my Jewish values for how to fight against what's happening. And I think, in the Torah, it teaches that safety and security are found in collective protection of those most vulnerable. And so I always approach everything by thinking about who is the most vulnerable at this moment and what do we do to not necessarily protect, but to uplift their voices, and to make sure that we are standing in solidarity with them. And I think that the movement for Palestinian liberation has done a really good job at making those connections and working together across movements, to uplift all of those being oppressed. And I think that we need to continue to do that because everything that's being used for the Palestine solidarity against the Palestine solidarity movement right now is going to turn and be used against many movements and many other organizers around the country. And I think just going along with what Ami said, I think really calling out Project 2025 and Project Esther, and the Heritage Foundation's attempts to really deny Jewish agency and basically to install Christian nationalists as the arbiters of Jewish past and our present, and undermining the voices of Jews that saying like we can't advocate for ourselves or that we speak with one singular voice. This is something we've seen be very bad for Jewish people previously when others define our community. And I think that we as Jewish folks need to continue to speak out that we are not one unified voice around Zionism. In fact, we have a lot of differing opinions and a lot of strong reasons why we don't feel that Israel is the answer to Jewish safety, but instead that Jewish safety is wrapped up um, in working together and in solidarity, and collective liberation.
Thank you. That's yes, amen. I think it's so great to have a conversation with people from so many from crossing those boundaries and building up that strength. It should give everyone hope that across the country and across the world, these kinds of conversations are happening. That we're talking about bridging those community boundaries. That in the Jewish community, we're not going to let a bunch of literal white ethno-nationalist, great replacement theory psychopaths pretend like they care about us and use state power to enrich their oil buddies. We're not going to do that. And people of all backgrounds are going to put their bodies on the line to defend our immigrant brothers and sisters who are being targeted by the state. Because at this point, we are also talking about, as Waleed said, our own democratic rights here. So I think we're going to. I think we're good. Oh, there's no mailbag today. I misread that. Okay, but there is a comment from the Egyptian Communist Party, which is our fraternal party, and they sent us greetings. So I'm so glad that as an example of international solidarity. So I'll read it out loud, and that'll be the show. So it's the Egyptian Communist Party. Greetings to Communist Party USA and all participants, with our best wishes for greater solidarity with the Palestinian people in the face of the massacres committed by Zionist Nazism. Your comrade Hamdi Hussein, head of the Workers' Bureau and member of the Political Bureau of the Egyptian Communist Party. So thank you, comrade. And with that, let's get back to it, because there's a lot of work to do.